All right, let's talk about that voice in your head. I think you might know the one. That relentless narrator, the internal debater, the one that's constantly planning conversations that haven't even happened yet. It's always on for some of us, and some improvisers, what we're told to aim for is to get out of your head. We're told to silence that inner critic, to shut down the chatter, to just like be present in the moment on the stage, basically to not think. And look, there's a lot of truth and value in that. Absolutely. We need to be receptive. We need to listen. We need to react authentically in the moment. But here's a thought, and maybe a little bit of a curveball. What if I told you that for many of us, that incredibly busy, sometimes overwhelmingly chattering brain, it isn't just a distraction to be wrestled into submission? What if that thing is actually powerful, perhaps even some kind of untapped resource for your improv? That you can have an inner monologue that's actually useful for improv. What if that monologue, the very thing that you might curse when you're trying to find your flow on stage and like get to sleep at night, can actually be useful? Now, I know that might sound a little bit counterintuitive. How can thinking lead to better, even more spontaneous improv? Kind of like, how can that being in your head actually get you out of your head? Well, in today's conversation, you're going to hear from my guest, Sabrina, who, a lot like me, navigates the world with a very active, very vocal inner speech. We get really honest about what that's like, especially in the context of a creative practice like improv that demands being in the moment, demands your presence. We explore how a constant mental monologue doesn't have to be a source of anxiety or nerves on the stage or lead to any of that on stage self doubt that you might have. I know what that's like. And it's not just about fighting your brain. Instead, you'll discover practical ways to understand your brain and perhaps even harness it. Think of this. What if all those what ifs in your head are actually a form of like pre-computation? A way that your mind is already exploring the possibilities, running those scenarios, almost like a flight sim. Yeah, I just watched the second season the second season of The Rehearsal. That's a strong recommend from me. Anyways, for social interaction and storytelling, that's what the flight sim is for. So you'll learn how you can use scenario building as one way to feel even more prepared, more grounded, and maybe unexpectedly less anxious when you step into the wonderful unknown of an improv scene. So, what if you've ever felt like your brain was just too busy, too cluttered, all that stuff for improv? If you've wrestled with that and all that internal commentary, or you're just curious about the different ways improvisers' brains function, this episode is absolutely for you. You're going to walk away with a fresh perspective, maybe even a newfound appreciation for the unique, complex, and sometimes noisy way your improv brain works. And then collaborate with it as it is today. Hi, I'm Jen DeHaan, and this show is called Your Improv Brain. I create improv and comedy podcasts with StereoForest, and I've taught and coached at several improv schools. Every week, I'm going to bring you a new episode of this show on Monday. This week, you're going to hear from Sabrina Banes, who's an improviser and tarot reader who lives in Bed Stuy and improvises with us here at StereoForest Podcasts and also with Improv College and Highwire. And one more thing before I play the conversation that I have with Sabrina, stick around until after the interview because I've got extra insight that I want to share, something that we didn't quite touch on in our chat about how this internal like rehearsal mode, the habit of mental scenario planning can directly feed into one of the most crucial skills in long form improv, something that can make scenes click really quickly, and you won't want to miss that. So here's the interview. I'm going to roll tape. So we were talking about inner monologues and improvisers. Inner, because I've noticed at least that there's a a lot of people that discuss having very active inner monologues, and then I asked people about that. I was asking you about that, and you mentioned that you have a very active inner
I
monologue
do.
as well.
Pretty much at any time that I am not actively engaged in a conversation out loud, I'm
Mhm.
actively engaged in a conversation in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's the same as me, like, when I mean, I'm live a very isolated
Mhm.
life, so it's sort of, it's leveled up how active my inner
Uh-huh.
monologue is, but it's always been this ongoing thing inside my head, talking to, somebody
Mhm.
else, who isn't there necessarily, having working out problems, what would the responses be? It's like quasi like rehearsing a conversation, but these are conversations I know I probably
Right.
won't have, but it's like verbal
Yep.
processing, in my mind or out loud. How does it work for you?
Um, Even when I was a very small child, I would be having these conversations, like mental conversations. Uh, the first thing that I remember, like the first way that I remember it manifesting is when I was maybe 4 years old. I was 4. We were driving across the country because we were moving from Maryland to Oklahoma, and
Yeah.
I kept myself entertained by having little conversations in my head with imaginary people. And then that
Yeah.
continued because I grew up an only child. I have a half sister, but she's much older than me and we didn't grow up together. So, because I
Right.
was raised as an only child, I spent a lot of time alone as a kid. Um,
Right.
and so I was the thing about having a really active inner monologue is that you don't feel lonely because you're
That is
never
true.
alone. You're always with someone.
Exactly, yeah. I think that's probably why mine has gone
Oh.
so, active
Yep.
being isolated, right? Like, it's a loneliness thing, and why I like listening to
Yeah.
podcasts too, because it's like, it gives you a little bit of relief from the ongoing
Yep.
onslaught of your brain, and somebody else can take over. How do you find that affects your improv practice or your performances?
Well, I always have a how do I put this? Because I'm having conversations in my head anyway, I don't have to take a lot of time to formulate a response to something that someone says to me because my brain is
Yeah.
always preparing for that. My brain is always
Right.
preparing to respond to someone. It's like I've practiced every possible permutation of every possible conversation a million different times.
Yes.
Like so this
Yeah.
conversation, I've rehearsed it.
You've
Yeah.
rehearsed it a few times. Was I more engaging as a
N
person in the
no.
rehearsal?
Yeah. No,
Really?
I
I was
find
like,
you very engaging as it is. I yeah.
"Oh." You
No,
don't have to say
I'm
that.
not just saying
I
that.
mean,
That I wouldn't continue engaging with you if I didn't find you engaging. Well,
really, you would just
I would
shut
just
it
be like,
right down.
"Nope,
It's just
nope,
like,
that's done.
"Alright,
That's
browser
done."
close. This is done." Yeah. I love that. I love that. I love that
Yeah.
for
Well,
me
because that
too, to
means that
think
you're
that yeah.
actually you're a fun person to talk to. Because otherwise, I would just
Yeah.
be in my bathtub talking to myself.
I actually also like it that it would just be closed down if I wasn't engaging enough. Like, cause then I would know. It would give me that immediate feedback that, like, the scene was over. It'd be like, "Okay, you didn't pass scene done.
Yeah,
And scene. Alright,
yeah.
nice."
What do you have
Um
conversations with yourself about?
Oh, everything. I would say that a lot of most of my conversations are about solving
Mhm.
problems. Very much less rehearsal now, and that's just due to the isolation
Right.
element of it. And a lot of, as you might know, a lot of the engagements I do have are improvised, so it is fiction. So I don't really need to ever rehearse for that because I can't. So I don't really have a lot of conversations I need to rehearse for. So most of it is just like
Mhm.
problem solving. going through and going, okay, this is the situation. How do I solve it? Or this, how can I be happier mentally? And and just processing through those things, or what can I do? What can I do differently? How can I make my
Yep.
life better? And just kind of having
See,
those
that seems
internal
healthy.
discussions.
I I I'm having conversations where I'm, like, rehashing old arguments with people that I haven't spoken to in 10 years, or, and then
Yeah,
I
yeah.
also anytime I have an improv show, there is a 100% chance, especially if that show is in person and I have to go to a theater, there is a 100%
Mhm.
chance that I have gone through about 3 different variations of how that show is gonna go. Yeah, like, I've
Okay.
and it never
Nice.
goes anything like I imagine, right? Because you get a different suggestion when you're
Yeah.
actually in the theater, you're interacting with people, so it's not like you're not
Right.
just offering up whatever is in your psyche, but my
Right.
psyche is preparing.
Right. So do you find that that helps your improv performance to sort of think about those things in advance, or is it more of a
It's
stress or something
It's
that you'd
neither.
like to
No,
not do?
it's kind of neutral for me, like, it's not something that I'm doing in an obsessive, anxious way. It's not like I'm
Right.
imagining the show out of stress. I'm imagining the show because
Right.
I'm going to the show, and I'm gonna do the show, and I'm thinking about the show before I do the show, right? So it's all
Right.
just
Yeah.
it's just natural. Um it's kind of like I imagine people who, who are doing disaster response for FEMA. They imagine
Mhm.
all of the potential disasters that could occur,
Right.
and they're not
Yeah. Yeah.
necessarily
It's
stressed about it when they're preparing for something. They're just thinking, "Oh, we could have a hurricane or a tornado or, sharks could attack." But yeah,
yeah.
that could
Sharks
always
could always.
attack. But they're not
Yeah.
they're not thinking about it when they're preparing for it, like, they're not thinking, "Oh, this is really scary and I have to be freaked out about it." They're just thinking, "Okay, well, if sharks attack, then what do we do?"
Yeah.
Right? So
Exactly. Yeah. What are the possible things that we would need to have
exactly.
with us, or yeah, it's just mentally preparing for all the
Right.
possible
So if I'm
outcomes, which is
imagining
yeah,
an
not
improv
right.
scene before a show, the
Mhm.
scene is not going to take place the way that I imagine it because the input that I'm gonna get from my scene partner will be different. The suggestion from the audience will be different. The just every the whole setting is gonna be different, but I'm kind of warming up, like, I'm doing warm-up scenes in my head. So there is
Yeah.
a benefit to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as it isn't inducing some level of anxiety that it puts you in your head during the show, then that's how you do you find that that helps you get yourself out of your head then? Because you've pre-prepared these things, you've already, thought out the possible things, or is
No,
that
that's
also
also
neutral for
neutral
you?
because I mean, again,
Right,
the inner monologue is just what my brain is doing 100% of the time that I'm awake. So
right, yeah,
since I'm always having that conversation, there's no value judgment that goes with it. Like, it's neither beneficial
yeah,
nor, uh, detrimental.
yeah. No, that's good. And I think, like, for me, the only when I was doing, dance fitness, which was something I did, like, 3, 4, 5
Mhm.
times a week, I don't remember doing any sort of prep work in my head like that. However, what I did do was I shut out for over an hour, I would shut out any potential area of
Oh, yeah.
stress for me. So it was like, I'm not going to check email. I'm not going to check the news. I told, anybody that I knew well enough to have the conversation. I was like, just don't bring up anything where we might get into a stressful conversation. Just the only time that I would really welcome small talk was was an hour to an hour and a half before I had to go perform on stage for teaching the fitness class because because I knew that if I got into the stressful thing, it would just put me in my head and I wouldn't be able to
Mhm.
perform that way. So I would just be purposefully avoiding any of that kind of stress. Bring it up right
Yep.
after the class, that's fine. And actually a good time because I'm super
Yep.
relaxed after a class, right? Like I'm in a great mood. So bring on the tough stuff at
Yeah,
that point, but not before the
the
class.
things that stress me out, like, right before an improv show are but they're probably pretty predictable, like, anything that's gonna trigger my misophonia, if I'm backstage and there's someone
Right.
smacking gum, that could ruin the whole show. That just
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but so I do tend to avoid stressful conversations, but you can't avoid, for example, if you're taking the subway in New York City, you can't avoid that there's
Right.
gonna be
Yeah.
stress on the train trip because that just
Yeah.
is. Um,
Yeah.
so there's always I feel like being a performer in New York, there's always this, wild card where you don't know what's gonna happen on the journey from your
Mhm.
home to your theater.
Yeah. Yeah. And coming up with those sort of strategies to deal with that is, I would guess,
Well,
pretty difficult, or it takes a lot of time,
I
I
wear
would
n
imagine.
noise canceling earbuds on the train. So, yeah,
Oh, that's
that's,
a good idea.
I
Yeah.
have I'm pretty, like, I shut myself into a cocoon when I'm when I'm moving around the city. It's a little weird, but it
Yeah.
keeps me yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I get it. Yeah, no, I get that because that's, I think, what I'm doing on in a different way is just basically cocooning
Mhm.
my brain, as much as possible, at least, not having those kind of conversations or, dealing with other kinds of stress. I think also that was why I was so methodical and having I had people would laugh at me. I had like this bin only has these things in it. This bin only has these things in it. And I was so regimented in the way that I had to bring things into the room and all that. And I
Oh, no,
think it
but
was to sort of try to avoid all of that stress as much as I
the
could.
more that you can control, like, tiny little things within your environment, the more you feel equipped to go into a
Yeah,
situation full of unknowns. Um,
exactly. Yeah. And yet we love the unknowns because we're doing improv,
it's
which
I mean,
is
that's
the ultimate
exactly.
unknown. Yeah.
Um,
We can't plan for anything, and that's
I
what we
but
want, but
you
before the
gotta plan
show,
I
I'm gonna control it as
well,
much as
I will say
possible.
that I have missed I do some online shows with a theater out of Canada with Improv College, and I have missed a couple of shows this season because
Mhm.
my next door neighbor blasts his bass beat, in the wall that we share, and and that
Yeah.
will send me into such a stressed out, like, uh, it'll it'll just mess up my headspace so much that I can't perform because I get yeah.
Yeah.
So anything that interferes with feeling like you're prepared is just gonna immediately, uh, put you off kilter. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. For the thing that we can't plan for and can't prepare. I wonder if there's something connected there, of just, uh, like, we're getting ready for this thing that we absolutely
Mhm.
can't control, which is in itself, I mean, it's stressful, but it's not stressful. It's such a it's like a joyful
Right.
stress, I
It's a
guess,
different kind of
maybe.
so if you can minimize um, the detrimental stress that gets into your brain before you engage with the joyful stress,
Mhm.
then that makes it somehow
Yeah.
more joyful.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that these things like the performance, the improv, it's such, even if it can be, hobby number
Mhm.
3, but it's such, an important thing in so many of our
Yep.
lives. It's something that we love to do, and things that you love to do and are important to you, you want to
You
protect
want
and
it
you
to go
want it to
well.
go as
Yeah.
successful as you
I
possibly can.
I do the
Yeah,
same thing.
exactly.
I read tarot and I do these parties sometimes, like these corporate events, where I'm sitting there for 2 to 3 hours just reading for 20 or 30 people over the course of a couple of hours. And one thing that I do for those parties is I take an Uber. I will not screw with the
Mm.
subway on a day that I have to be that everything like, if everything has to go really, really well, I'm just I I put it in the contract, like, "You have to pay for my transportation."
Yeah. No, that's super smart. And really, I mean, these are just self
Absolutely.
accommodations that we
Yep.
know we need and that we make. And yeah, it's very
Yeah.
important to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for
Thank you,
joining me
Jen.
today. Thank you. Okay. So much to think about there with Sabrina, right? It's fascinating how us improv enthusiasts develop our own personal strategies, like these invisible frameworks that control and give you mental preparation. It's all really in service, though, to being completely spontaneous and uncontrolled on stage. That idea of pre-computation of your of using your own inner monologue, that it's not really a bug in improv, but it can actually be a feature if you channel it and understand it. That's really powerful. It's like a testament, really, to understanding how your own improv brain works. And you'll hear the surprising thing that I teased about in the intro in a second. But first, make sure you check out Improv Update if you want to get my free newsletter that summarizes ideas like this and links to all the new episodes of this show, which again now come every Monday. You can find a link for that in the show notes or the description, and also to the Discord community. You'll find link to that as well, where you can chat about this thing and anything else improv, acting, voice acting, performance, all that stuff in this space. And you can check out Sabrina's show on YouTube. You can find a link to her team, the Fae, with Improv College in the show notes as well. And also a show that she and I have on StereoForest called Manifesto Update. All right, so that bonus insight that I promised you about how all that pre-show mental preparation, all those what ifs and everything, from tricky conversations to, yes, even sharks, how that actually helps you find the game of the scene faster. So here it is. When your brain is completely, constantly, all the time, it's always running scenarios, solving those hypothetical problems and imagining different outcomes in real life, it's essentially training itself to rapidly assess situations and identify patterns and anomalies and unusual elements in what's happening. Your brain is becoming highly skilled at asking, what's different here? What's the interesting angle to this thing? So when you step out onto that stage or you start streaming or recording audio, however you do your improv, and your scene partner says or does something, now your finely honed scenario scanner muscle is prepped and ready to go because of all that work you did. You're already primed to look for the hook, to find the deviation from the norm, your norm, the thing that makes this moment unique, which is often the heart of the game of the scene. Your brain has already been practicing finding that thing in real life all day long, so it gets much quicker at spotting it on the stage or in the podcast or wherever you're doing your improv. Overthinkers unite, am I right? Anyways, thanks for listening to Your Improv Brain. I'm glad to be back making these shows, and I'll be back next Monday with another look at the fascinating world of improv and the brains that make it happen, like yours. See you then.